Hey, everybody. Does AI stand for artificial investment? Let's find out. We'll be back in a minute. Hey, folks, we're back and welcome to Tech Strong Gang for Wednesday. We're here today with Chris Blask, who's a veteran, and Jeff Rich, who's from the Identity
Defined Security Alliance.
There you go. And Jeff has been on the show a couple of times, but for those of you who have not met him, he's kind of in charge of this alliance that focuses on identity, which is awesome because we're going to have a couple of security related conversations in a minute. But first, let's start with this whole investment from Nvidia into OpenAI, which is valued at $100 billion, but it comes in increments. Apparently, it starts at $10 billion a throw for OpenAI ordering Nvidia chips in return for building some data centers around those chips, which theoretically becomes this virtuous cycle between your customer and a supplier who's going to actually keep building these things. Chris, I know you've been dabbling in AI for a while, but this is the latest in a series of these investments that we've seen. NVIDIA invested in Intel. And one of the dirty little secrets of AI, apparently, is that we are subsidizing the crap out of the processing of those requests. And it's costing companies a lot more than they're charging end users. So the question becomes, is this sustainable? And what do you make of this investment?
So I don't know. There's a couple ways to look at this. There's centralization and fragility. Are we integrating more vertical risk, into the same stack? For all sorts of reasons, economic control, of technical architecture. The same time, this is the space. I don't know that I can double think the decision makers. If I were them, would I be looking at certain things? Maybe, right? And as you say, the phased approach of it, may indicate some thoughtfulness on the decision makers, but we will see. We have these conversations all the time, and in this show, we literally have these conversations all the time. We try to think of something new to say, and sometimes just need to say the same things over again, I guess. But we understand. I think everybody understands over the last several decades, 100 years, however you want to look at it. While we've advanced things a lot, we've introduced a lot of brittle systems. The supply chain, where I spend so much of my time, where it's hard to get people to think that we need more than just one thin line of linked attestations to know where things coming from. So we're looking at chips and that whole thing. This particular issue. Are we concentrating risk? Getting some benefits for some stakeholders, but at the same time, making the system more fragile. So. Interesting, a lot of concerns. Jeff?
Yeah, I would offer that although those are the right points, if from a bigger picture point of view, if I were them and I were doing this investment, kind of like what you said, the phase approach makes sense for two main reasons. One, is there ever going to be a profit? And I think we need to ask ourselves that question. I don't have that answer yet, but I don't see a definite yes down the road. We're going to have to wait and see. And the second one is, and it plays on the profit motive to a degree, there's a lot of other hidden costs with AIs, the energy use, the downstream environmental impact, and everything else around that, not to mention the societal impact, which I'm not even going to touch. Just mention it, but not touch it. You can add all that together. Are the costs really as well defined as NVIDIA thinks they are? Is it simply chips? I think not.
I can't help but wonder if this will just set the stage for some sort of investigation for antitrust eventually, because you created this kind of tight ecosystem. And I get to Chris's point, there's virtue in that cycle. But at some point, somebody's going to complain and say, basically NVIDIA has locked out competition in this space already. And Chris, you've been around federal governments. It might take them a few years to wrap their heads around it, but eventually somebody's going to come knocking, right?
You would hope, right? And again, if you go down this path, this is what governance is for, right? And but Jeff, to your point, we had to, as we always have. Again, this is not new. If you worked in global security for any length of time, you realize that policies in various geographies and jurisdictions are what they are, and they're evolving along certain lines. We have a certain arc for that sort of thing in the current U.S. administration. So, which raises the question for me: will they? It depends. Is this an era where one of these big players, the U.S. Market, will actually reward and ignore risky behavior? And if so, that doesn't change my long-term view of this. That open systems and democracy and capitalism, all these things work because they're self-correcting. Any one actor can make whatever bad choices, or what may look like good choices, but turn out to be bad choices in the end. And if they, that's not the right analogy for a show like this. If they fail spectacularly, someone else will pick it up. And as we discussed in this show, in this forum, I have a lot of questions about how we're even allocating workload. Jeff, power allocation. The systems we're putting together have enormous benefits. To be clear, we're going this direction. Nothing's going to stop it. The question now is, how many Keystone Cops mistakes will we make along the way? And this one, again, the people at the top, people making the decisions, to be clear, are not idiots, right? And almost nobody is, right? When you don't understand the decisions people are making, and organizations being, you don't understand decisions organizations are making, the people inside are acting rationally. So, I can, in a vacuum, I could argue the pros of this. I can argue some of the risks of it. The reality is, how will it play out in the environment that we're actually in? And we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Our friends in Europe are probably going to have more to say about this ultimately than the U.S. will, no doubt. You should say, yeah.
So I have a question on that. Extending it a bit more, the UN General Assembly is meeting this week. I have trouble believing that the two letters AI won't come up somewhere.
Yes. Right. There is an actual session about AI safety that's being discussed at this thing, but I'm sure in the hallways, a lot of companies and countries are having conversations amongst themselves about what does all this mean, because it does feel like, U.S. dominance of the sector. So I'm sure there'll be some interesting things. But let's imagine you were sitting over at AMD. Does this mean that you got to pony up $10 billion to get a customer for your AI chips? Is that how this is going to play out as well? I mean, how crazy does this get? Chris, what do you say?
Oh, it's too easy just to say yes, right? And to get back to, again, we use these acronyms and company names. There are people there, there's a bunch, as you get to the decision-making cycle, not that many, and they'll make their choices. And, and I'm not going to advise them, or at least not for free, but there's a lot of arguments to be said for yes. I mean, look, to my last statement, I can argue what might be the right or wrong thing to do for, technical reasons or structural reasons, but there's also, we live in a reality, right? And the reality, like you say, Jeff, we have this going on. We have the UN General Assembly next week. We have all sorts of global policy things going on. And when you're looking at the kind of time frames and the financial investments, and the number of competitors, the number of entities globally doing these sort of things, you've got to make your choices. And it at the risk of, to in fact repeat myself, these things will play out. I have very strong opinions. The AI side of things, let me just take it there. Narrative sovereignty is a term we tend to use a lot more in this. Is civic AI and world we're talking about these days. And it's not quite a lot. You can talk about disinformation, misinformation, influence campaigns, and that's a real and present issue. But it's also in how we run our systems. Do I control the narrative sovereignty of my company? Do I actually know what I'm saying, what we're saying, what we say to each other, what we're saying to the outside world? Turns out we haven't been doing that extremely well. And this whole AI, what we were calling AI this time around, lends itself really well to that. So the attestation systems that I and many others seem to think that we need on a global basis to deal with these sort of human issues get back into corporate decision making. What is the right decision? Are we making decisions transparently, even amongst ourselves inside the company, or not? And so I look at these executives; they're trying to navigate worlds where, hey, literally, Mike, you and I, I find this calendar year, particularly this thread of conversations every week, to be fascinating. Looking back at what I said and what we talked about in January or March or June. June was a huge month this year, right? The world kind of changed in June. We're here now. If you're in the corporate office in the C-suite at AMD, how exactly do you navigate that? That's a hell of a question, right? And I'm happy to be an armchair critic and say what I would do. But we need to recognize the reality of the decision, the situation the decision maker's in, and so. Anyways, at the long rant, but I think the narrative sovereignty attestation systems. This is 99% of what I and QuietWire and the open source Civic AI we're all about. We're applying this in different ways, and I look at this block, this topic. This what we're talking about here is yet another process that will be inflected by the success or lack of success of that adoption of attestation systems, which is a little bit abstract and perhaps opaque for the viewing audience. But do we know what we're even doing? And we see these cartoonish sort of decisions we make, and it seems ridiculous, but you get on the inside and again find out that the individual humans are acting rationally. It's just that our systems aren't very rational.
I suppose when I look at it, and Jeff, you've been around these kinds of decisions before, and whether it's Java or whatever else, but it seems like with Nvidia, it's not just the processors, it's the CUDA software framework that they're getting everybody to write to, and those APIs, and that's where the lock-in is going to be. We have seen fixes to this in the past, so will there just become pressure to say, hey, we need CUDA or some clone of it to be open source and available and avoid this kind of lock-in, and maybe that's how we resolve this issue?
I can't think of an answer that's very far from that, because it really boils down to, Chris, when you talk about, is this going to be a success or not? For commercial organizations, the definition of success is ROI for every investment. Bottom line, that's it. In fact, that is the bottom line. So,
that's what they're for.
Yes, exactly.
They're money-making organizations. That's why we create them, yes.
So even though a concentrated M word could potentially exist on this, which could bring a bigger ROI, we still don't even know that yet. So I think there will be, first of all, at some point, either there's going to be a disruptor either from some regulator that says, no, you can't own everything, or there's going to be a disruption from another organization that says, we have an alternative way to do this. And by the way, it costs a lot less, and it may run faster. There's going to be other benefits. One of those two collisions is coming down the road. And like Chris, I don't know which one it is.
Right. And the reality is that, for corporations, we're sitting here armchairing, but maybe, and I've been in this position in major corporations myself. I have a legal fiduciary responsibility to make decisions that increase shareholder value. It's not just greed. That's that's why we agreed to form this thing. It's called a company. It makes money. That's why we spend time in it, and we take roles and responsibilities. And this may work. Doing what I would see is morally and ethically and technologically and security a bad idea, may be the right choice, because you will make more money. Now, I may not be personally happy with that. I may think it makes our infrastructure fragile, and I think I'm right, but that doesn't mean that it's the wrong choice for those stakeholders to make.
I also think there's a fork in the road, and it's nearer than we think. If you look at all of this stuff that they're talking about for these kind of large data centers, it's built around training. They're really focused on, we're going to go train super intelligence or AI general intelligence or whatever the term of the day is you want to do. And that's all well and fine. But I think that the bulk of what we're looking at in the future is going to be the running of the inference engines. And that doesn't necessarily require NVIDIA GPUs. We can run a lot of different processors in those instances. And I also think that we're going to see a lot of these models are going to be distilled into smaller models that run more efficiently on those things and are better trained and better targeted. So maybe, as great as this all sounds, but maybe, this AGI case involving NVIDIA and OpenAI is, high-end computer science, but not where the action's going to be. Chris, am I crazy?
hold my coffee, right? Because yes, I mean, we've talked about this on in this, you and I, and on this show, we talked about this workload distribution. What do you really need? We're using Einstein to open the door, right? So every time we're booting up an AI and having, this huge power surge, and to the point of this segment, we need all these chips. That's not really justified. It's not the kind of thing that lasts long-term, 3, 5, 7, 12 years from now. Are we going to do it that way? No, we're not. We're going to have massively distributed workloads where a lot of things will get done. You had just in the last couple of weeks, we had a great conversation on this, where old computers, we're using old computers today to do modern things. And with AI and with actual LLMs running on 10-year-old machines, because the actual LLM part of it isn't much, and it doesn't need to be right away. It's not talking to a human. It's performing functions. So, I would like to hope for all my nonpartisan statements to date, I hope they're wrong. I hope everybody betting on owning the castle and owning the keep turns out to be wrong. And I think there's a really good chance that they will be. This is also, to my last point, a chance that they won't. Maybe they're making the right calls, but I don't think so.
So Chris, are they going to convert those big data centers in 10 years to big storage facilities that you can rent out?
Basketball courts, community centers, yeah. They can
Pickleball courts, man. Pickleball. All right, folks. I think we're going to leave it there, but I would be careful whenever I was evaluating anybody's financial statements. If I'm taking dollars from companies that I invested in, does that really count as a customer dollar, or is that some other thing that we should keep track of in a different way? We'll be back in a minute.
Discover TechStrong Group, the epicenter of tech innovation. We're your go-to for reaching IT leaders and practitioners worldwide. Our secret? Impactful content that sparks awareness, engagement, and top-quality leads. With us, you'll access editorial websites, streaming videos, virtual events, custom content, analyst research, and more. Join our satisfied clients. Let's revolutionize your tech journey. Contact us today and tell your story to the world in the most powerful way with TechStrong Group.
Hey folks, we're back, and under the heading once again of why we can't have nice things, there's a report up on Security Boulevard talking about how the bad guys are starting to do some stuff with AI, and it comes in two forms initially, and this may just be the beginning of a larger trend. But the first one is they're actually trying to poison the data we're using to train these AI models. And then the second part of it is, well, they're actually starting to use these deep fakes a little more aggressively. Jeff, you live and breathe all this security stuff. Does any of this, A, surprise you? And B, what else should we expect?
No. So the only thing that surprises me is that it's now coming to light. I think this has been here. Every single tool that you have, whether it's a shovel, a pick, a handgun, or a rifle, can always be used in two different directions at least. All right. So here we are. Now that we have AI, that's a great benefit in society and what we're doing for decisions and how we, invest our money and how we make our company work and everything else, that all the wonderful things that can come from AI when used properly. The bad guys look at this and say, hey, that looks like a really good idea. I think I'm going to use it too. So we certainly can't be surprised, one, at poisoning the data. That's not a new trick at all. And Chris is violently agreeing with this one. Not a new trick. They're simply using a new tool. So I'm really not that surprised that we're seeing it. I'm surprised that it took so long for it to become visible. I think it's been here for a while. This is kind of like when you have a heart attack, you realize, okay, if I look back over the past 15 years, I can see all the warning signs and lifestyle and everything else that got me here. I think that's where we are with poison data right now. I think there's more of it out there than we believe. And the second thing with deepfakes, and this is something that's really close to what we do at IDSA, identity has now become the cornerstone for security in any system, because no matter what, if you don't know who or what you're dealing with, you don't know what's going to happen in any way. This goes back to, if you look back at military bases, back to, probably back to Roman times, when someone approaches, the phrase that's uttered is, who goes there? They want to know who you are, and in some cases, find a way to validate it. We have better ways to do that now than in Roman times. So identify who you are, validate who you are, And that's not happening well enough, often enough right now. We are still taking shortcuts. Many organizations are still real happy with using SMS as a second factor in authentication, and including financial institutions, which amazes me. Healthcare. I actually had an encounter with a healthcare professional earlier this week who asked for my social security number. And the number I gave that individual was 2025. That's the year we're living in. You shouldn't be asking me for my social security number anymore. What are you going to do if I don't give it to you? And completely befuddled, and said, okay, I guess you don't need to give it to me then. Well, thank you very much. I wish more people would take that position, not to be, either arrogant or aggressive about it. But when you add all that together with deepfake, the same principle applies with deepfake now. As good as those systems have become, and they're getting better by the hour. They are getting better by the hour. What we need to do as security professionals is find a way to use that and leverage the same systems to be able to ferret out the ones that have a high probability of being real and have a low probability and should be weeded out, or find another way to authenticate who they are. And there are good ways to do that now, whether it's with a token or a passkey or using geolocation. There's so many different factors you could use now available to us that don't involve SMS that lets you determine it. Now, with AI and deepfakes and interactions from machine to machine, which is the one that people aren't talking about yet, but is certainly there, there are certificates, as an example, that really should be used. Not a new concept, but if you have a trusted certificate with a CA that you have faith in, you could have a much higher probability that whatever machine interaction your machine is having is valid rather than coming from a bad guy. So, I may not be making anyone feel any better about this because, yeah, the bad times are here with it right now. A lot of good times are as well. We just need to keep up. We can't be lazy about it.
All right. So do we need like a new hashtag? Hashtag no SSN? What do you say?
I wouldn't mind a no SMS. I could. In fact, I may start that. Yeah, I think that's not a bad idea. It has its place, but not for authentication.
All right. Chris.
Well, go ahead.
For the uninitiated who don't know what data poisoning is all about, what is it that cyber criminals are trying to do here exactly? Because it seems like, I'm kind of hoping to poison an LLM that may have some impact. It seems like a long shot, or is there some other way of thinking about this thing?
Well, without getting too deep into the gory details, I just basically want to agree with Jeff. This is not new. There's almost nothing new about this whatsoever, right? I think but of the things that are not new, the most useful thing to pay attention to is this is a speed thing, right? And Jeff, as you were talking, we're the same era, right? Not war dialing, but war dialing, right? Back in the day, someone realized that, hey, if you just call phone numbers and a modem picks up, what phone number has a modem, and now you can have fun trying to break in that modem and the network behind it and whatnot. Then somebody else said, you know what? I can just take an entire block of phone numbers and write a script and have my computer sit here while I'm asleep and call one phone number after another. And that sped things up massively because all of a sudden, you could hundreds and thousands in a night. And for those of us on this side of things, that was early in my career. I was like, oh, wow, that's an interesting little twist. And then just to make that story as fun as it was, the response was, we will make it illegal. There's a law, I think, probably still in the books in the States. If you call someone and hang up without saying anything, that's actually against the law, or it was made against the law. So what the hackers did was just change the code and add a little WAV file that says, sorry, wrong number. So if a human picks up, they say, sorry, wrong number. So anyways, without going too far down the rabbit hole, this is the same sort of thing. The hackers, the bad guys, now have AI tools that speed them up massively. If the defenders don't, address that, and use AI tools to speed yourself up massively, can be done mostly by not listening to people like Jeff and I, right? Just go out and do it. Get a ChatGPT account. Ask it tell it who you are, what you're trying to do in a situation. You'll move forward not as fast as the bad guys, but way faster than all the other people around you. Don't have to be faster than the bear. And Mike, I'm trying to recall if I actually addressed your question at all. They're trying to put information into your system so that your systems betray you, right? Again, right? Over and over and over again. This is another interesting way to do it. And there are literally so many, and because of LLM model architecture, the word layer isn't just a metaphor. There are so many layers to do this in, that we could have individual shows talking about individual, a LoRa layer. You want to stick, poisoning in the LoRa layer in the actual model execution, as opposed to, poisoning the data set you're training the models. We could do this all day long. But Jeff, you touched on, I will try to end on this. We have built this entire structure saying, I have an attestation. I've got a certificate. Wait, heaven help us, we'll have 2, and we'll use text messages. That's not how anything works. Every decision we all make to pick the next words while talking to you right now, to walk across the street, to do anything, to be a human being, we have 3, 4, 5, 6 things we can, attestations that we can navigate on. We have built our entire security architecture on 1. I'm going to get the ultimate cryptographic authentication for Jeff, and I'll know that one thing tells me that's Jeff. No. 2 is a start, not very good. 3 is fantastic. 4 is ridiculous. It's not exponential, but we have to have more than 1 line of brittle authentication to give us access to whether or not you're poisoning my AI.
Mm-hmm. So, Jeff, is this data poisoning stuff just basically amounts to damage for damage's sake? I mean, is there any monetary purpose to this for the bad guys? I mean, or are they just trying to, destroy things for the sake of havoc, and they're just really, anarchists? I don't know.
Well, I think there's certainly an anarchist component somewhere in there. There always is when there's bad guys involved, because they can jump on the wagon and have a certain level of anonymity in the beginning. But I think there's a lot of different vectors at play here. Let's start out with a big one: nation state. Okay, if a nation state decides it wants to poison data, for instance, that's being used by an AI system, the advantage they have is from the time they start the poisoning until this time it's discovered, they can either redirect a strategy, they can redirect weapon deployment, or anything in between. They can find a way to exfiltrate data using it, potentially, because if you poison data in a certain way, you can put markers in there that say, when I get this data, I know it's data that I poisoned. And when I get something that doesn't have my marker, I know it's real data. So, there's an exfiltration opportunity that really didn't exist before. AI has allowed that to happen at scale. And those, at nation state, there's those too. Plus, there's also the whole, can I bring this nation down just by having all of its system collapse on themselves? That's another one too. That has been tried in the past with electric grids at different Eastern European countries. Estonia in particular had it happen quite a few years ago. Once again, not new. So those are the nation state vectors. I think you also have, competitive, corporate competitive vectors. And I'm not accusing any given company, but let's face it, there are organizations out there, or at least individuals and organizations, that have no compunction about saying, I'm going to find a way to either get my competitor's information or destroy my competitor. Same methodologies I talked about from a nation state. And then you have the individuals or small entities that just want to say, I'm going to hold data ransom, because you could do that as well. Once again, with those markers, you could say, I'm going to hold data ransom and let an organization know your data you can't trust your data. You don't know what's accurate. I do. If you want your accurate data, you're going to pay me in cryptocurrency. So there's that. And then there are the anarchists that just want to say, let me see what I can screw up. Here I go. Boom. All of those are there. Plus, there's probably some I didn't mention. So, gosh, it feels like I'm the harbinger of doom on today's show.
Well, the nice thing about what I'm really enjoying about this period of my career is that, while you're right, we get to bring a lot of the doom. But one of the things I've been saying all along is that, regardless, the lights are still on, the internet still works. And, does that mean you're safe? Oh, Lord, no. And there's a lot of things you should do. But will it all work out in the end? Generally speaking, just don't try not to be the end. But I love your exfiltration example. That's something people can really get to visualize, and you're exactly right. And also, each of these things again recurses me back to my point that it comes up over and over again. We're having we're going to let AI be agentic and actually do things. How do we trust it? It's like, what do we do now? Well, there's Bob. I mean, Bob has been doing this for 30 years, and we trust Bob. Why? Because he's Bob. Well, what do you really literally mean? And we find that, again, we have, sort of fragile systems or not. In OT and operational technology, we find that you can trust Bob, and you know why, because there's a system and a process around it. It's not really about Bob, right? It's about you have a system in place that doesn't break if Bob makes the wrong choice. Whereas we have these IT systems where if one system makes a bad choice, you're done. This shouldn't be. We should have, again, at least two-factor authentication, 3. Again, literally in the attestation world, there are 3, 4, 5, and 6. There's not 7. There's not 19. It's not talking about gigabits of everything. We're saying that if you were going to make a critical choice and you have one thing to base it on, you are fragile. It is a brittle choice, no matter who you are. If you have 2, you can triangulate on that from your position to those 2. And with 3, you can make mature choices about risk and decision. Without those, every single thing, Jeff, to your point, is just fodder for you and I getting to get more airtime talking about today's latest, silly risk.
Well, to your point, I'll trust Bob to the point where I discover he has a drinking problem, and then all bets are off. But when you think about this for a minute, and correct me if I don't understand this, but as I understand it, it's these models aren't like software that I just go patch when I find there's a vulnerability. To your point, they're layered, and all that data is in there. And once the model's trashed, it's trashed. And I got to pretty much go and rebuild the model and replace the entire thing. And this is not an expensive proposition or inexpensive proposition. I don't know, but it seems like it's a level of fix that's a lot more complicated than people might think.
Let me push back on both those points, right? Because, you don't trust Bob up until you find out he has a drinking problem. What my response to you is that you made a bad trust decision in the first place. How on earth did you build a critical infrastructure system and be the person responsible? And it comes down to whether or not whether or not Bob has a drinking problem and whether or not, no, you build the system so that if one node in the system, like Bob, poor Bob, and again, Bob doesn't have a drinking problem. Bob just got contacted by nation state actors who told him that unless he does certain things with a totally straight face tomorrow at work, his family, won't be there tonight. You didn't engineer a system to allow Bob to save his family's life. Forget your company, right? There's a level of willful, negligent incompetence. I will take this approach. I just think about this. Yeah, if you've made those decisions out in the world and it's worked okay, to be clear, you have had moral and ethical failures that you should personally be held liable for. And if things happen, if the dam breaks because you made the decision to build the entire infrastructure based on whether or not Bob has a drinking problem, you will suffer the consequences. And you will, personally, inside your own head. And people in these levels of responsibility think of many of the great disasters and the captain in charge and so forth. It doesn't work well for them because you can't justify that. So we've built a lot of fragile systems.
Listen, Jeff, that sounded like your classic insider threat problem. Is that what we're really looking at?
Boy, when Chris was describing that, the 2 words Aldrich Ames popped into my head. And for those of you who don't know, either Google it or ask your parents. But Aldrich Ames was very deep in the intelligence community and was trusted, I won't use air quotes, but that might be a justifiable use of them, was trusted for decades with top-level nation secrets in the U.S. And it was discovered that he was selling them. And he had been selling them for a long time. And it's because there was a single thread of trust that existed, and he was Bob. And there was no way to validate, was Aldrich Ames compromised? Why was he compromised? Was it something he did intentionally? Was he under duress? There was nothing really. I mean, there were certainly cursory controls put into that, but there was nothing to really figure out, is that actually happening or not? And I'm not certain we're in much better shape now than we were then in the intelligence community.
Well, let me riff off that and go back to Mike, the second half of your question, right? Which is similarly, these are level of complexity challenges. It doesn't matter what the frame is. We think, yes, you had asked, are the layers of software and AI, is it now so far that, no, it has been there for a long time. If you thought you really had a handle on your software and you knew what was, no, you're wrong. I mean, since, 10 lines of code, no, that's not how it works. You've gotten away with it because it has not come back to bite you yet. But you've needed systems all along that, again, assume that you don't know. Because, emergent properties, levels of complexity. This is where my inevitability curve thing comes to, because it's an evolutionary thing. You see genetically, biologically, all sorts of things happen for a long time, and then there's some evolutionary crux. And you can say that all of the other things were bad ideas, which is true, literally in its own way. But in their environment, they were fine. But they had fundamental flaws that didn't. Saber-tooth. Saber-tooth animals have evolved 8 or 9 times in history, completely unrelated. They have nothing to do with each other. What they have to do with is a high oxygen environment that supports, strength being the main determining factor, and coffee being delivered without asking for it. So as soon as that stops, they go extinct immediately. There's no second generation. They stop immediately. So there's a lot of these inflection points, punctuated evolution that come along, and they point out that, believing that you knew what your software was doing in the first place was not a long-term choice.
All right, folks, we got to move on to our next subject, but I will just throw out another hashtag we might consider. Hashtag Zero Trust AI. Who knows? We'll be back in a minute.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Hey folks, we're back, and we've been talking about ransomware, and I feel like we've suggested maybe we were making some progress here and we were more cyber resilient than ever. And then along comes this latest attack where cyber criminals are basically taking out the luggage system that's managed by a company that probably none of us ever heard of until this week. And now we see travel delays, and it's impacting everybody. And Jeff, I know you've been looking at this, but do we just is the underbelly of IT just too damn soft?
Well, I think this kind of goes back to a lot of what we were talking about in the previous segment, in that there's a level of trust that we have because nothing's gone wrong yet. And there's a phrase I use: the universe is, and I'm going to have to stop and say it, metamorphic. The universe is metamorphic. And whether it's a saber-toothed tiger or an IT system or an AI layer, no matter what it is, it will change. It can't remain static. Everything has to move and either grow or die, change or die. So, there's a lot of fragility in there. Overall, we still have solid systems. And sometimes it's issues like what's been happening with baggage handling and boarding passes in the EU that occurred this past week that make us think, do we have enough backup systems or different levels of trust to make this work? A lot of airlines in the EU thought, well, it's down, that's fine. We'll just issue paper tickets, until they realized that the paper tickets that they print came from the same system. So they still had a single point of failure. They didn't fix that problem. So if you want to issue paper tickets, that's a good redundancy. But have it completely out of stream from the system that you're currently relying on when that system, turns over and doesn't work right. So there's that. I'm going to bring up a tangential, and I think it's important to actually all three segments that we've discussed today. about, and it's the airline industry. Now, Qantas Airlines, and I happen to, I was affected by this, although only because my name's in it, not for any other reason. But on June 30th, Qantas was, the data was compromised. I believe it was ransomware, and they got personal data for 6 million customers. That's a pretty good size number. Names, phone numbers, birth dates, things like that. No credit cards, no passwords, no passport information. So there was really no PII involved there. That's good. But what happened, and I really think it's worth noting, is that the board of Qantas cut the short-term bonuses for all senior leaders by 15% because of that. And boy, if I'm ringing the bell for that one, because not that I want to see people, executives' bonuses cut, but we are finally, for the first time, it's 2025, and boards of directors of companies are saying, hey, you're the ones running the companies, you're responsible for making this happen. Something bad happened that probably could have been prevented. You have to suffer because of it. And I am very happy that accountability has started to show up. And I don't want to get us too far from the whole ransomware and the systems we want to count on, but that's a downstream effect that I think we're going to start seeing more of, and that's a healthy thing.
All right. Well, see, there's another hashtag right there, hashtag cyber bonus cuts, and we'll just keep going with that. But Chris, I got to ask you this question because I know you've talked about this multiple times over multiple shows now, but why in God's name do we keep having all these single points of failure? Are we unable as entities and engineers especially just to look at these systems and kind of figure out where these things are going to be? Because, in hindsight, at least, it seems pretty obvious, but for whatever reason, we just can't seem to be able to figure it out.
Well, we were talking biological evolution just recently, right? And saber-toothed creatures. So you have to understand the reality of the situation we're all living through, right? So, just sticking with biology for a minute, you're following a certain path and, you reproduce. There's another generation. That is the right path. Now, will it extend indefinitely into the future, past some punctuation event? Maybe not. But they're separate issues. And, in my very first cybersecurity show, when we launched Borderware, I think it was 92, when I was in Atlanta, and I was brought up, someone came up to me with an oil refinery, and I said, oh my God, I forgot about oil refinery. The whole OT world that I came from, forgot about it. And I went back to my little 5 people in a dog company and said, hey, can we do anything for OT? And the answer was, sure, and we can go out of business because we'll get one customer, and Checkpoint is out there partnering with Sun and yada, yada. And at the turn of the century, I had exactly the same situation. I'm running the firewall business for Cisco. And at the point that we were coming along, doing $60-70 million a month, massive presence, and a whole team of Cisco folks brought a whole set of oil industry to us. And as the firewall team, we looked at it really hard and had to come back and say, no, we can't actually do it. And to be clear, I have a fiduciary responsibility legally to Cisco shareholders, who include not just the rich and powerful, but retired people and their income, to put money where it makes more money. And in 2000, as a vendor, I could not have fixed that. And therefore, at least from that source, which is a major source in the world, there was no solution. So what we keep coming back to is not that we're bad people or bad companies are making bad decisions. It's just that there are intrinsic flaws with this when and if we hit various punctuation events. These are unlikely to survive the gap. And I think the point of this particular topic and this ongoing conversation we have over the last, what is it, Mike, a year and a half or more of these calls, and we all have all these conversations all the time, is that I would assert, I would posit that there's a number of chickens coming home to roost type of extinction events that are going to be driving home these sort of things that, long, thin, fragile, brittle, one by one systems don't survive the break.
No. Jeff, maybe we should look at this entirely differently, right? And just tell people that cyber attacks and these things are now a fact of life, and they are likely to delay your flight as much as a snowstorm, and we should just kind of suck it up, and that's just the world we live in.
Well, I'm not sure I would use "we need to suck it up," and snowstorms are more predictable, by the way. So, in fact, I am, 2 weeks ago when I was on this show, I was at an airport when I did it. And today I'm actually, you can see I have my flying braces on. I'm on my way to the airport as soon as we complete this for yet another identity conference. It's conference season. But to your point about what's going to get in our way, we need to stop thinking about, we really do need to change our perspective. But I don't think we should just give in and say, well, it's going to happen. Sorry. Nope. I've been doing this 50 years and I've never said, oh, well, I guess that's just the way it's going to be. Never. And anyone I know that's had success doing this has never said that. And it's always a matter of change your perspective, and it usually means expand your perspective. As an example, when I would do incident response or incident response planning and training, I would always don't focus on what event caused your issue. Focus on the effect of the issue, because there's going to be multiple vectors that can give you that same effect. What are you going to do when that effect is felt? And then it doesn't matter if it's a snowstorm or if it's a ransomware attack or if it's a union strike. It doesn't matter. If your flight's interrupted, you need another way to get to where you're going or determine that you're not going to go there. So you need to expand your perspective to say, should my flight not happen or be delayed, how else could I accomplish what I want to do? Do I go try to rent a car or take a train or whatever it's going to be?
That's it. Literally, that's what well-seasoned travelers. You're saying that as someone who does it, right? Because when I'm on a plane, knowing that I have a connection, I don't trust the connection is going to leave the ground. Sometimes they don't. What am I going to do? I'm standing in some country, and I think we need getting into the organizations themselves. And Mike, I don't think. Because I love the across the aisle sort of cynicism versus optimism debates we have. This mirrors a lot of my favorite conversations. Because maybe I'm wrong, but I think we're driving towards an era that isn't close. I wouldn't put it that way, but I think you can see it from here, and it's getting into the frame where even people of my age who are going to in our working careers live in that world where cybersecurity where defense gets ahead of attack. It's just that we've rushed ahead of ourselves. We built communication systems that communicate, absolutely will communicate. However, are they secure? No, oh, Jesus, no. And just not even, on every level. And we're backing into the fact that we actually need to make them secure. Now, an artifact of that is that everyone alive now is used to the idea that, cyberattacks and hybrids and blah, blah, blah. That doesn't mean that's intrinsically true forever. I think we are capable of building information systems that are a lot harder to attack than to defend. You just need to have things in place that to date we have never implemented yet. But and none of it is really new rocket science. I've got my own opinions on the things we can do right now, but you can look back over the decades and say, oh, that's right. People were saying that 40 years ago, 70 years ago, 120 years ago. We're just still in a very startup phase in our entire global communication system.
Mm-hmm. All right, guys. Well, we ran long on the first two blocks, so I'm going to end this here. But I would give notice on this point. The airline industry many years ago noticed that there were just far too many plane crashes, and they got together and all the engineers, and they decided to build more resilient planes. This could be the same model that we can use not just in the airline industry, but everywhere else we go to build more resilient IT systems from the ground up, because it's pretty clear at this point that we're just suffering because of our own lack of maybe foresight. Hey, gentlemen, thanks for being on the show and sharing your thoughts today. That was great as always. And thank you all for watching the latest episode of Tech Strong Gang. Please stay tuned for the rest of the lineup for Tech Strong TV. We got some awesome stuff as usual, and we'll see you all again tomorrow.